Welcome, I'm Casey McFarland, and you're listening to the Consciousness Continuum. Today, I'm here with Robert Burney. Robert has been a shining light in the realms of codependency and inner child healing. He has written multiple books on the subject, which tie into not only our individual lives, but the unfolding of consciousness on a collective level as well. Thank you for being here, Robert. It's a pleasure to have you on this conversation.
I'm glad to be here, Casey.
So what sparked your interest to begin with in this area of study?
Well, I'm a recovering alcoholic and addict, and I've been clean and sober since January 3rd, 1984. So I'm just coming up on my 37th year of sobriety here. And once there's an old AA saying that AA doesn't open up the gates of heaven and let you in, it opens up the gates of hell and lets you out. And what it let me out is into his life, which I had no idea how to deal with, because I was, so I had to start learning how to deal with life, and that's what led me into codependency recovery and inner child healing is to try to figure out how to live life in a way that worked, because the way I learned in childhood didn't work at all.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that our relationship with ourselves and others reflect like the collective in a way?
Well, yeah. Well, I believe that that codependence is the human condition as we've inherited it, and it was caused by planetary conditions. It wasn't caused because human beings are sinful and shameful, like I got taught in childhood. But and so yes, we get programmed in childhood to live life, to expect life to be something it's not, and to live life in dysfunctional ways. And the human condition has evolved in a way that the more that civilization progressed, quote unquote, the more it distanced itself from having any kind of respect for nature and natural law, and the more dysfunctional it got.
Mm-hmm. So
the societies in the history of the planet that had the most functional societies, cultures, in terms of the individual being's relationship to the planet, to the consciousness, were Aboriginal societies that had respect for nature and natural law. And so they had, in respecting nature and natural law, because part of the civilized society's problem is that it's based on the belief in separation. And instead of connection, like Native Americans are, the Great Spirit is present in everyone and everything, and they honor everyone and everything because, Great Spirit's the energy is present. But in Western civilization and civilization in general, spirit's a hostile condition because it's based on belief in separation, which is what makes violence possible. What makes destroying the planet possible is this feeling of being separate from each other and from the planet. And I don't believe that's the truth. I believe that we are all connected, and that the civilization on this planet is based on false beliefs.
Yeah, definitely. It almost seems like we're taught that we need a middleman to get what we need done, like to have connection, or we've got to go to a doctor to get well. And in some cases, that's certainly true, like if you break your leg, you want to see a professional, but at the same time, we don't need a middleman to have a connection with spirit. And I think that's quite important for people to understand, because it's kind of the basis of life, and whichever way we want to interpret it, it's up to us. But I think that it's really important for people to understand that there's always an opportunity to be connected to spirit.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things I say in my book that, was important about the 12-step recovery movement is that in the 12-step recovery movement, one of the important concepts is that you got to have a higher power of your own understanding, and that you can have a personal, intimate relationship with that higher power, which is not what was taught in Western civilization. Like you said, that, you had to have an intermediary and which was part of, it's part of the control thing that once Christianity became the state religion of Rome, then it was all about control and about, the opiate of the masses, as Karl Marx said,
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, for sure. What are your thoughts on ancestral trauma?
Well, I think, we one of the first state when I got into 12-step recovery, and they told me I could have a higher power of my own understanding. It started me on a spiritual quest to figure out how there could possibly be a loving God force in the universe, And
Mhm.
one of the first leaps I had to make in terms of my perspective of things is that if there is a loving to be a loving force in the universe, it can only be possible if we're here more than once. Because if we're just here for one lifetime and there's starving children over here and there's Donald Trump over here, that's not fair and loving in any way, shape, or form. So it has to be over multiple lifetimes. And that what I came to understand is that karma is a law of energy interaction that ensures that everybody ends up even. All actions of cause on the physical plane are paid for with consequences on the physical plane. So nobody ends up in the hole. There's no hell in some afterlife. Hell is right here, and it's feeling separate from God.
Mhm. Yeah, that's powerful. Um, I think that yeah, I think that's huge. Like, and a lot of people they don't feel connected to God, but I feel as though we kind of portray God in a way where it's this great man up in the sky who has nothing to do with us, but in essence we're part of that too, but that doesn't make us any better than our neighbors. It just means that everything is divine, and if we could come to that understanding, then I feel like we treat ourselves and others in a much different way, because I really agree with you that it's not fair that people are hungry. We have
Yep.
such a great excess. We're constantly producing, we've got so much to go around, but then there's this great need, and it's not yeah, it's not compatible right now. It's not working the way it should.
Yeah, well, it's that belief in separation that makes it possible to have homelessness and billionaires and all the dysfunction we have in our culture, because it's it's everybody for himself. And like one of the things I believe that those of us who are doing the healing in this lifetime are old souls who were born at a heart chakra level of consciousness, so we had more sensitivity and more awareness from the beginning. Excuse me. And the majority of the people on the planet aren't old souls, and they don't know what we're talking about. And there's so many of the people and our culture that they're coming from a third chakra perspective of consciousness, and in the third chakra, where we manifest out of and take in. But basically the belief of the and a third chakra person is that one who dies with the most toys wins, and that's bullshit. And so a third chakra perspective is all about acquiring and get. I mean, it's so ridiculous to think that anybody needs $1 billion. I mean, there's no way to even make that any place near functional. And so that people are coming from a third chakra perspective. It's all about getting and acquiring and getting more and they don't have a clue about being connected to others, because it's all about separation.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it all comes back to like who we see ourselves as and who we believe that we are. Because if we actually knew who we were, then I feel as though we wouldn't feel the need to act out in all these strange ways. We're just like reinforcing our sense of self with whatever we think is relevant. Like we have more things, we're going to be a better person. But what are we doing with all that money? Are we just buying private jets and we have 5 houses and there's so many people outside starving? That makes absolutely no sense.
No, it
So,
doesn't.
yeah. Um,
So the first time somebody ever told me, I mean, what I came to believe is, what first time somebody ever told me that I was a spiritual being having a human experience, I got really upset. I got really angry. And the first thought I had was, that means I got to be out among them, because I didn't want to be out among, I wanted to, get spiritual by going up on a mountain and meditating or something. I didn't want to be out among them. But when I heard that, I realized that was the truth. And that if I'm a spiritual being having a human experience, I'm not here to get spiritual. I'm here to bring the spirituality into the human, and that, we got taught the opposite. I talk about my book about how the energy field of collective emotional consciousness was reversed to the truth of a loving higher power. And so we got taught the opposite, where we got taught that we had to do human perfect in order to get spiritual. And that's actually the opposite of the truth. We are spiritual and we're never going to do human perfect,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that it was all reversed. We were trying to do fill the whole inside with something from the outside, and it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty interesting how you say that we believe we're separate too, because even if something isn't real or has truth to it, we can kind of create false illusions based on our belief, because beliefs are powerful. So I feel like we just have to, gradually dismantle the illusion. And as we remember who we are, then that becomes more concrete and visible and relevant, our true nature.
Yeah, well, that's, I talk in my book, my first book, is Codependency, the Dance of Wounded Souls, about how I talk about quantum physics, and, because what quantum physics tells us is that, everybody's connected. It's all a big dance of energy, that atoms connect and form molecules, and molecules connect to form everything and everybody we see. We're temporary manifestations of the interaction of that subatomic interactions, and so it's all a big dance of energy, and we're all connected. We're all part of the oneness of the energy of all that is. And that what I believe is that anything that we are part of that oneness, we always have been, and that this what we're experiencing here in the lower vibrational frequencies is a temporary illusion. And all the energy fields on this level are temporary illusions, and that some of them last for fractions of a second, some of them last for billions of years, but they're all temporary.
Mm-hmm.
And that on the highest level, it's all about it's the vibrational frequency of love, what I call love with all capital letters. And it's about, we're all connected, we're all one, and there isn't any separation, is an illusion.
Mm-hmm. Because even on our worst days, we can have a terrible day, we're feeling so down, but there's always that space that we can go to that is love, and it's always accessible. It's kind of like an underlying current in a way.
Well, I believe it's a transcendent vibrational frequency that is love and truth and joy and beauty, and that we can access it by being in the moment.
Wow,
We weren't taught to be in the moment. We were taught to be human doings, not human beings. It helps me to see it as there's two planes. There's a horizontal and a vertical, and the horizontal is about being human and relating to other humans in our environment. And on the horizontal, it's about doing, it's about accomplishing, it's about competing, it's about, experiencing. And so we got taught to focus on that horizontal and be human doings, and we didn't get taught how to be human beings. And the being is on the vertical, and we can be in the moment and access that transcendent vibrational energy of love and joy and truth and beauty. And the easiest place for most of us to do that is with nature, in a beautiful place, or with animals, or with little kids. The hardest place for us to do that is with other human beings, because that's where we got wounded, and that's where all our defenses are.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. It's quite fascinating and ironic too that even when we are in a place of pain and acting out of trauma, it's almost like we're searching for that connection in the material world by whatever it is, buying things or masking our emotions with excessive eating or addictions of some sort. But all in all, we're always searching for that connection, which is always available to us through ourselves.
Yeah, we've been trying to raise our vibrational frequency to go home. And that's what all the external, the addictions, the obsessions, the compulsions, that's what they're about. We're trying to raise our vibrational frequency because it doesn't feel like home here. I always felt like somebody screwed up in the transporter room and sent me to the wrong place,
Right. Yeah, yeah. Do you feel like codependence kind of relates to our dependency on the system, like the governmental systems?
Well, it relates to our dependency on all that outer or external stuff. I mean, we got taught, well, that one of the things that's really important to understand about codependency is that our core relationship with ourselves is all screwed up. And it has to do with the natural child developmental process. When the part of a child's brain that understands cause and effect and logic and abstract concepts like time or death doesn't fully develop until around 7 years old. And it's why my grandson, a few months after his 7th birthday, all of a sudden on the way to school one day, he pipes up and says, "How does Santa Claus get to every house in the world in one night?" Because his mind was maturing and he was starting to understand cause and effect. And he realized that's a ridiculous concept. But prior to 7, children are egocentric and magical thinking, And because we're egocentric, that's why there's a meme on Facebook that goes around here says about how, when a child is abused, they don't end up hating the parents, they end up hating themselves, And what happens to children is that, we're, like I said, we're egocentric and magical thinking. So when we're little kids, our parents are our higher powers. They're the God and goddess in our life. And we don't have any realistic perspective of them whatsoever. When we're young, when we're 3, 4, 5, 6, we're not capable of processed thought. We're not capable of saying to ourselves, Mom must be really stressed out. That's why she's yelling at me. We just know Mom's yelling at us,
Right.
And so what happens is any kind of abuse or deprivation, anything in the environment that's uncomfortable, alcoholism, fighting, anxiety, depression, stress, we end up feeling responsible for it. We end up internalizing and feeling like it's our fault because we're the center of the universe as far as we know. And that's where the core of codependency comes from. It's what I call toxic shame. And the difference between guilt and shame, in my definition, is that guilt is about behavior. I did something wrong, I made a mistake. Shame is about our being. Something's wrong with me. I'm a mistake. And that's the core of the disease, is this feeling that I'm somehow defective, unlovable, and unworthy because my parents were worried and didn't know how to love themselves or be emotionally healthy. And so that's the foundation that we build our relationship with ourselves on. And so what happens is the ego, which is a part of our being whose job it is to help us survive, adapts an emotional and behavioral defense system to try to control our behavior and emotion so we fit into the rules of our dysfunctional family. And that toxic shame, and one of a child's jobs is to manipulate its environment to survive. Children are born manipulators. And so their job is to manipulate their environment so they survive. So if being cute is what works, if throwing temper tantrums is what works, if crying is what works, if being the good child is what works, if being invisible is what works, that's what a child will adapt. And the neurological researchers nowadays say that the neural pathways in our brain that relate to relating to other human beings are pretty well set by the time we're 4 or 5 years old. How scary is it? The neural pathways in the part of our brain that deals with relating to other human beings is pretty well set by the time we're 5 years old, and no one ever teaches us how to change those neural pathways. And that's where I talk about in my book how the more that civilization progressed, the more it distanced itself from nature and natural law, the more dysfunctional it got in terms of individual beings, feelings of belonging, feelings of being part of, and that the healthiest cultures, like I mentioned before, were Aboriginal cultures that had respect for nature and natural law. And with the Native Americans, when children got to be adolescents, they had training and initiation rites to teach them how to be adults. They had ceremonies to welcome them into their power. We got sent to junior high school and tortured, We learned how to be adults in junior high school and high school. I mean, it's any wonder the world's so screwed up.
Yeah, wow, that's powerful. I
Yeah.
often think about like how much progress and how much pain we could avoid if that was introduced, in elementary school, and teach kids about their emotions, and they're not to be feared, we should process our emotions, and um there's so much that could be done about it.
Yeah, well,
So
we got so programmed to expect life to be something that's not. It's like the because of they, like I said, the ego adapts to this emotional and behavioral defense system, which is codependence. But the ego isn't a bad thing or a negative thing. It just got programmed really badly.
mhm,
That dysfunctional program started with fairy tales that taught us that when we meet our prince or princess, we're going to live happily ever after.
yep.
Well, that doesn't work that way. Life doesn't work that way. It's like I used to call it the frog princess syndrome. I felt like an ugly frog and I thought I needed a princess to turn me into a prince, right? Well, when I think I needed another person to do a certain act in a certain way for me to be okay, what I end up doing is trying to control that other person. And that's not love, you know. And the fairy tales were followed up by the books and the movies and the songs that taught us what romantic love is that I can't smile without you, I can't live without you, you are my everything. That's not love either. That's an addiction. you know,
Mhm.
that's making the other person my drug of choice or my higher power. And so we really got set up to not have any idea how to do romantic relationships in a healthy way, to expect them to be something they're not. But we were set up for life in general by the fairy tales because we got the message there was a destination to reach where we're going to find happily ever after. And there is no destination to reach. We're on a journey. Life is a journey, and it's not about reaching a destination. But because our parents were wounded and did not love themselves, they, what we experienced from them is conditional love. It felt like they loved us if we did what they wanted us to. And so we end up trying to get to the destination. We end up living life trying to get there. Wherever there is, the degree, the house in the suburbs, the marriage, the house in the suburbs with 2 cars in the garage, the success, the money, whatever. We keep trying to get there, and there's no there to get to. Because even if we get to those places we were trying to get to, it doesn't work because we're trying to fill a hole inside of us with something from the outside, and it just doesn't work. And so, but we got taught to try to get there and not to be here. I realized I was living my life like it was a dress rehearsal for when my life was really going to start. When I got the girl or when I got the money or whatever it was. And so we want to, that's one of the core dynamics of codependency, is what I call destination thinking. Trying to get there, trying to find what's going to fix us, trying to find what's missing. And it's an inside job. It's not stuff from the outside. But that's the second part. There's 3 basic dynamics of the core of codependency. And the second part is we got taught to look outside for our self-definition and self-worth. To people, place, and things, money, property, and prestige, accomplishments, popularity, relationships, and also to external manifestations of our own being, like looks and talent and intelligence. And all those outside or external things are all subject to change. They're all potentially temporary. When we base our worth on something that is temporary, we're in trouble because our whole world can fall apart. When we lose the relationship or the job, or we start getting older and our looks start changing. And so what I learned to do in my codependency recovery is to make a distinction, draw a boundary between what I call ego strength and true self-worth. And the ego strength is about the outside and external things. And there's nothing wrong with any of them. There's nothing wrong with being good looking or smart or rich or successful. It's when we think that's what gives us worth that we're being codependent. It's outer or external dependence to feel like we're worthy. And I believe it actually could be more accurately described as worshiping false gods or being too attached to the illusion. And I believe our true worth comes from our spiritual essence, that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, that we are connected to the source, the force is with us, we're extensions of the divine, we're children of God or the goddess, part of the great spirit, however you want to say it. But all human beings have inherent worth because they're connected to the oneness of everything, not because of anything temporary outside of us.
Mhm.
And that is 180 degrees the opposite of what we were taught growing up in our cultures.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
we're
like,
taught to look outside for our worth, self-worth, instead of getting connecting with our self-worth inherently. Codependency is like a disease of reverse focus. We're looking outside to feel good inside, instead of feeling good inside and then expressing it outside.
yeah, it's like there's so much focus on getting to the next spot, get level up in your career, get a good hot boyfriend, get the latest clothes, and then you'll be the best that you can be. But those things are transient. They come and then they go, and you
Yeah.
might get a small boost of self-esteem, but at the end of the day, that's nothing concrete. But on the other hand, if you go out and you have a really heartwarming conversation with somebody, that kind of stays, like you reach that place inside of you and you have this connection with the other person. And that's, I think that will expand and be permanent. It's like when we have those moments where we connect with that place inside of us and share it outward.
Well, that's where we need to really connect with ourselves. We didn't get taught how to connect with ourselves. And we got programmed. It's really deeply ingrained, this programming to look outside for our self-worth. And part of what makes it complicated is that it also we grew up in an emotionally dishonest, dysfunctional culture that taught us to have a really screwed up relationship with our own emotions. Our emotions are a really valuable part of our being. They're what actually tell us who we are, but we have all these emotional reactions that are not telling us the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we're reacting, when one of our buttons gets pushed, or what I call our inner child wounds gets triggered, what we feel is what the child felt then, not what's appropriate for an adult of our age and knowledge and experience to feel in this situation today, but it feels like our total reality. It feels like our total truth,
Oh
And
yeah.
so what I learned to do is I had to counter program to what I was feeling in order to start seeing things more clearly. Because as long as I'm reacting out of the old tapes and the old wounds, I'm not being present in the moment. And I'm not seeing life clearly, And so, because part of what happened in childhood is when we were small, we were the little people, they were the big people. They had life and death power over us. We had to focus on them and try to read them in order to try to take care of ourselves, get our needs met, and survive. And if we came from a really overtly dysfunctional family, where it's alcoholism or fighting or anxiety or whatever, physical abuse, mental illness, whatever, we became like hyper vigilant in trying to read them. And so all our energy was put into trying to read them to figure out how we should act to be okay. And then we went to school and we focused on them. And we grew up focusing outside and never seeing ourselves clearly because we were still reacting to the core programming. And the core programming told us that there was something wrong with being human.
Wow.
The part of the enforcer for the ego in this defense system, this codependent defense system, is what I call the critical parent voice. And this is programming in our own mind that we adapted in early childhood to try to control our behavior and emotions. And the critical parent voice uses the same tools on us that were used on us, which is fear and shame and guilt. And it does it according to the rules we learned in childhood. And basically what we learned in childhood was that life is a test that we can fail, and we can fail by doing it wrong. Because we grew up in black and white society where right is what you should do and wrong is bad and shameful. And so we grew up, one of the first books I ever encountered that had anything to do with inner child stuff was a book by a German author named Alice Miller. And it was called The Drama of the Gifted Child. And it was a really dense, thick book. And I never made it all the way through it. But in the beginning, she said something really powerful. She talked about how the German philosophers of the early 19th century, who were the precursors of the modern psychology movement, used to emphasize that in order to control children's behavior, you had to stamp out their exuberance, stamp out their joy of living, break their spirits, basically. And that's what we come out of is, children should be seen and not heard, spare the rod and spoil the child. Children weren't considered individuals with rights up until very recently in our history. It's only been the last 25 years or so there's even been such a thing as healthy parenting classes. And so we but a lot of us got the message it wasn't okay to be a kid, because one of a child's jobs is to explore its environment and touch things and taste things and get into things. And a lot of us got punished for that and shamed for that. We got the message it wasn't okay to make mistakes, to spill the milk or whatever, that it wasn't okay to do anything to upset our parents. That it wasn't okay to be emotional. We got the message it wasn't okay to be too emotional about anything, including it wasn't okay to be exuberant and be too happy. If we got, we're exuberant in church or in the store, we'd get shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And we got, most of us got the message also it wasn't okay to be sexual. So basically the rules we learned is that life is a test that you can fail, and we can fail it by being an imperfect human being. And so the critical parent voice is judging and shaming us for being imperfect. At the same time, it's causing us to feel terrified of doing it wrong, and really, obsessively try to figure out how to do it right. That's a miserable, horrible way to live.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of our modern healthcare system, mental health system. It's very focused on the problem and you're not right and you have these issues, but we could approach it in such a different way. There's much to understand about the origins of how we experience pain and become who we are today. And I don't think it's much about being wrong or being inadequate of some kind.
Well, sorry, I just had a text from my grandson, but
No problem.
that one of the things I talk about in one of my articles is how traditional Western civilization is focused on concrete and rational stuff, and that they don't take into account the emotional or the spiritual. And so traditional Western medicine is focused on just everything is chemical, and it doesn't take into account the emotional and the spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
And so doctors, which include psychologists, any doctors, are focused on the chemical, on the physiological, and so they think that the problem is chemical and that the solution is chemical. And so it's of course there's an imbalance of brain chemistry with depression or something like that, but who knows which came first? It's a chicken and egg thing. Was the imbalance in brain chemistry before the manifestation, or was it caused by the emotional wounds and the trauma?
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually learned a lot about the wounding process by looking at cases of multiple personalities, because there are people that just were pushed farther, and that a lot of the manifestations, the traditional psychological thing is to put people in boxes and say, this is, you're bipolar or you're whatever, and some things do need, medication. Bipolar is one of them, but so often the diagnosis is based on the different types of personality disorders that they manifest. I think are just manifestations of different aspects of codependency most of the time, and that they could deal with the core wounding and deal with the emotional and spiritual wounding, then a lot of that clears up.
Wow. Yeah, it seems like our diagnostic is very one-sided. It's not so much about one being right and one being wrong. I feel as though there's a lot of great things in the Western way, but at the same time, it's not the whole story or the whole picture. And if we could incorporate things that are also true, but we just can't quantify with modern day science, doesn't mean that they're wrong. People have been indigenous people all over the world have been understanding these sorts of things for millennia. And just because they don't speak English or we can't quite you know, comprehend what it is or we can't quantify it, it doesn't mean that it's not real.
Right, right. Yeah, because it isn't about quantifying, you know,
No.
you can't quantify emotions, you know, and or spirit, you know, and if you're trying to quantify it, then it's not gonna involve, it's not gonna include those aspects, and that's a big part of who we are, you know.
Hmm. Yeah, there's so much. I don't really think a lot of this comes from a bad place, and maybe some people have bad intentions, but I just think you know, people do the best with what they know, and we we're all trying to search. Most of us are searching for connection, and we have different religions all over the world. But to me, it seems like we're kind of chipping away at the same mountain, and we're in different places, and we're seeing it from where we're at, and have experiences from where we're at, and another person's is going to be different. And we spend so much time fighting against whose belief is the right one. And why can't we celebrate what is similar, and the fact that we all are looking for that connection, you know, because then we could open up doors and we could learn from our neighbors. They could learn from us.
Yeah, well, that's part of the original wound that caused the human dilemma. In my belief, is that the polarization of the energy field of the collective intellectual consciousness, collective human intellectual consciousness, which is called the lower mind, and it's that polarization that caused the reversal of the energy field of collective emotional consciousness. So we were living life reversed for thousands of years, and focusing on the outside instead of the inside. And that, I believe, changed. I believe that the age of Aquarius started in the late 1980s, you know, and that changed, and the energy field of intellectual of collective emotional consciousness changed back into alignment with the truth of a loving higher power, a loving force, and that's what started. It became, it is a new age. You know, a lot of the new age stuff is like out of balance, but it is a new age. But what the polarization of the lower mind was still there, and that's what's manifesting in the world today, is that polarization. You know, and it's all this us against them kind of stuff, and it's part of I believe, a planetary cleansing. And when you go through a cleansing, the poison has to come to the surface, and we got the poison on the surface right now.
Hmm. Yeah. Somebody told me one time that it's like you have a big glass, and we've been pouring water in the glass ever since we've been alive, and there's going to be some sediment at the bottom because we've been pouring muddy, dirty water into it. But when we start to pour the clear water in, obviously there's going to be a little chaos, and it's going to kind of, you know, get muddy for a while. But the longer we pour it, the clearer it's going to get. And it really feels relevant to me today. Kind of feels like that's where we're at.
Yeah, to me, the thing that was so important was to really get it that that there are planetary conditions that cause all this, and it's not because there's something wrong with human beings, you know, because human beings were blamed. You know, sometimes people ask me when codependence started, and I said, well, look at the story of the Garden of Eden. Eve gets blamed because Adam doesn't have boundaries. How screwed up is that, huh?
Right, exactly.
And since then, women have been, scapegoated because men don't have boundaries, you know?
Wow. Yeah. Um, do you think that we are in a change right now? Like, to me, it
Oh, yeah.
seems like things are quite grim. There's no doubt about it. You know, there's every day there's a new news story that something's going on that's chaotic. But at the same time, like, could we be in a better spot? You know, it seems like we're opening the wound, and we can't just have positive change overnight. We're not just going to wake up tomorrow and things are going to be as they always should have been. We've acquired some chaos and some scum that we've got to chip away at. So seems
Yeah,
kind of positive.
I think we are going through a planetary cleansing, and there's a lot of chaos, like you said, and a lot of The part of the because of the emotional dysfunctional emotional relationship that we have with ourselves. One of the survival tools we have as human beings is the ability to turn fear into anger. And because the people are scared and they're hurting, they get angry.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of anger going on in the world because there's a lot of hurting people,
Yeah, yeah, it's true. It's like we're all just trying to survive the best we can. And then when something compromises who we are, who we think we are, then we act out and we defend ourselves, because how dare someone stomp on who we are? And another thing I think about is this whole New Age movement. It's good that it's bringing light to it, but at the same time, there's quite a bit of mishmash of what's actually real. For example, there's this thing like kill your ego. Your ego's bad. You got to stomp on it. But what are you gonna do? That's your container. You just have to kind of shine it up a bit and make it more relevant to who you actually are. I don't think that killing the ego is the answer at all. I'd like to
we,
hear your thoughts on that.
we need to reprogram the ego because it was programmed really badly because of this core programming, this outer dependence. And, like I said, there's a destination thinking we got programmed with from the fairy tales, and then we were taught to look outside for our self-worth. But the third basic dynamic is we were taught to compare ourselves to others. That we had better, if we had worth, if we had better grades then, if we were better looking then, if we were a better athlete then, if we had a better car then, whatever. Growing up in a codependent culture, we learned that self-worth was a competitive issue, which means in order to feel good about myself, I have to have other people I look down on. And then conversely, there's always somebody to look up to feel like I'm not there yet. So it's like, here isn't okay, but at least I'm better than them, but I'm not going to be okay till I get there.
Wow. Yeah.
It's really a horrible way to live. That's our egos got programmed to relate to life from fear, shame, and scarcity. And that's a horrible way to live. And we need to reprogram our ego because our relationship with anything is dependent on our perspective of it. And we need to change our perspective in order to change our relationship. Like in my book, I use the old joke about three blind men describing an elephant by touch, and they're describing three different things because they're touching different parts of the elephant. And what I say in there is they each are speaking his own truth. They just have a lousy perspective. And that's what codependency is we've had a lousy perspective of who we are and how to do human, what the meaning and purpose of life is. And so we need to change that perspective. And a lot of the problems with the New Age movement have to do with people trying to do spiritual bypass.
Mm-hmm.
They want to get spiritual without dealing with the emotional stuff, and it doesn't work. It's like some people, in teaching people how to change their relationship with themselves, I always talk about how important it is to develop a detached, objective observer perspective in order to start seeing our own internal process more clearly. And that one of the things I always ask people is if they've done Eastern meditation practice, because in the Eastern meditation practice, they teach an observer perspective, but it's a passive observer where you observe your thoughts and your feelings, but you don't actually change anything.
Mm-hmm.
And some people use meditation as a form of antidepressant to stay disassociated from their feelings, and it doesn't work. As long as we're disassociated from our feelings, we're not owning who we truly are, and we're not in touch with who we truly are, and we can't get in touch with our own heart and soul. And so the observer that I teach people to do is be a proactive intervening observer. We actually go in and change the ego programming. We actually change the neural pathways in our brain doing the inner child work. And that's what's so important, is to develop this objective. We all have an observer perspective, but it's a critical parent voice. And I always thought that's just the way I saw it. I didn't know that it was programmed from childhood. It was environmental, and that everybody has a critical parent voice and got taught to keep up appearances and to live life backwards, because of this programming. And so we have to change the programming in order to start changing our relationship with ourselves and life.
Wow. Yeah, that's very interesting. There's so many ways in which we can kind of beat around the bush and not deal with the actual issue.
Mm,
And I don't think it's really about one tool being right or wrong. It's like how we use those tools. And do we use them to go deeper and to figure out why we react in certain ways, or do we use them to justify how we react and to point the finger outward at others? And I think it's also a constant work, you know, we constantly have to work on it. We've got to be compassionate with ourselves and humble and realize that we've never, you know, I don't think that we can ever really get it. I don't know, I could be wrong with that, but I feel like we're always working on it, and there's always more to learn.
yeah, there is, but and it's this ongoing process, and it's a journey, and that's what's really important to do is to learn how to be present today and have moments of joy today with and quit trying to thinking we have to get someplace.
Yeah, so
We want
true.
to be present and be able to have the ability to have feel some joy today, but that in order to feel the joy, we also need to feel the sadness and the rage and the pain, and the fear.
Hmm. Do you see a connection between codependency and narcissism?
Well, narcissists are a version of codependence. All it's it's all a narcissistic wound. It's a wound to our self-image, to our self relationship with ourselves. But and there's a whole spectrum of behavior that is codependent. On one end of the spectrum is the traditional codependence, like people pleasing, rescuing, enabling. And the other end of the spectrum is counterdependence, who convince themselves they don't need other people. But I believe that narcissists, pure narcissists, so there's people that are more narcissistic than others, but pure narcissists are sociopaths. They have no empathy, they have no compassion. And I believe that they're born that way,
Yeah,
that
'cause
that
yeah, go ahead.
and so that a pure narcissist can't get it. They can't look at their own behavior. It's like there's a meme on Facebook that say, narcissists are always the victim or the hero. They're never the villain because they can't look at their own side of the street.
Hmm, interesting. Yeah, it seems like too far one way or the other really can be harmful. We've got to try to navigate um, as much as we can, kind of in the middle, and recognize when we're acting out of the past, and when we're just kind of spewing out our own toxicity onto our surroundings, and um, yeah, just take it easy. And I think compassion's a huge thing, like reconstructing how we interact with our inner child. Are we always blaming it and yelling and screaming at it, or do we've got to reparent it almost. We've got to raise it again.
I believe that the journey, the healing journey, is to getting in touch with who we really are. And that who we really are is these spiritual beings having a human experience, and that the more that we can get access to that, I believe that by doing our individual healing, we are affecting the collective. That
Mhm.
that we can't do it from doing the outside stuff. We need to do the inside stuff, and sometimes that means taking actions on the outside. But the key is to really healing our relationship with ourselves, and that is part of healing the planet.
Yeah, that's so true, I think. Yep. Because our relationship with ourselves kind of defines how we perceive everything, how
Right.
we perceive people's actions, how much we take to heart, and what we define as real. So the more we can understand who we really are and get right with that and appreciate ourselves and find joy in the moment, then the better capacity we have to live a joyous, successful, and satisfying life. Um,
Right.
I also think that we're so conditioned to either be in the past or the present. We're worrying about what's happened, or stressing about the details and how we're going to get from point A to point B. But while we're doing that, we're literally handing over our power that we could otherwise use to make progress in the moment.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that's so important to realize, like, codependence is an ego defense system that helps us to survive, but excuse me, it causes us to end up feeling empty and dead inside, because we don't know how to deal with our feelings. It's really screwed up because we had to learn to disassociate. We had to learn to shut down emotionally because it was too painful, because we were, it didn't feel like we were loved by our parents. And so it felt, we kept trying to earn that love, and we didn't feel lovable ourselves because of that core relationship, that toxic shame at the core.
Right.
And so part of the way the ego tries to control things is with fear, and it really screws us up, because the way the ego tries to get us to avoid feelings actually creates more feelings. It's like all human beings have a fear of the unknown. It's part of our survival programming as a species. We had to learn to check the cave for saber-tooth tigers before we moved the family in, or we wouldn't still be here. So we have this fear of the unknown, but what the ego does is tries to get, when we start feeling that fear of the unknown, it gets us into our head trying to figure out how to control the unknown, how to control the future, how to control things we can't control. And then we end up projecting these horror movies in our mind about the future that have themes like impending doom and financial tragedy and being alone forever and ever and ever. And it creates more fear, the way the ego tries to get us to avoid fear. It's like worry is a form of negative fantasizing. And, like some of us got the message of, what if we weren't worrying, we weren't being responsible, How dare you relax and enjoy life? There's so much to worry about. Well, we need to learn to be present and stop worrying about the future. I spent most of my life in the codependency recovery, either in the future in fantasy, because that's, fantasy, positive fantasy, when I get there, when my ship comes in, whatever, or negative fantasy, the horror movies, and I related to the past from regret and from a victim place, a victim of the horrible mistakes I made, and a victim of, what other people did to me. And I wasn't present today because I was in the past or the future. And that's part of what the ego does to try to help us escape from the feelings, because in order to be in our body in the present, we need to feel our feelings. And so we need to learn to do that. And what I realized is with the past is I needed to recognize how powerful this childhood programming was, and how, as long as I was reacting, that I really was doing the best I knew how with the tools and knowledge I had. And as long as I was reacting to the old tapes and the old wounds, I was powerless to do things any differently than I did it. I needed to get that so I could forgive myself for the past and start seeing it differently, start seeing that there was a path unfolding there and that I was being taken care of. And instead of looking at mistakes, see them as opportunities for growth. And so what I came to realize is that I need to learn from the past. I need to grieve for the past. Sometimes I need to make amends for the past, but regretting the past is an absolute waste of time. When I'm regretting the past, I'm judging myself for something that can't be changed. And that's a waste of time, and it's not just stuff from 30, 40 years ago. Sometimes it's something from 10 minutes ago. If I say something stupid, quote unquote, I learned to say, well, I wonder why I said that way. What can I learn from that? Instead of judging myself and shaming myself for being imperfect.
Right.
I'm always going to be imperfect.
Yeah, that's really powerful. It's almost like we can debilitate ourselves and be totally incapable of doing anything with fear. It's like we can just ruminate over what we've just done or what we've done in the past, when really we're just doing the best we can with what we know. So the quicker we can make amends with that and realize, like that worked for us then, but we have the capacity to make different decisions now that make more sense based on who we are now and what we've got to do. So I really like that, what you said.
That's part of what's so important. As long as we're reacting, we're not being present, and we're not making conscious choices. We're just reacting, And so it's so important to develop this objective observer perspective as the empowered adult part of us that can make conscious choices and can start taking, responsibility for the things we have some control over, instead of trying to control things we can't control. We basically got programmed growing up in our cultures to live the serenity prayer backwards, to feel like we should be in control of things we can't control, like other people in life. And we didn't learn how to have any effective control over what we can control, because we're trying to control ourselves with shame and judgment and fear.
Wow, so true.
When we're shaming and judging ourselves, the rebel in us rebels against that. And that's what I do. We do what I call the battle cry of codependency, which is, I'll show you, I'll get me. Somebody hurts me, and so then I do something to hurt myself, because that's what that's what I learned to do to nurture myself, is go unconscious, and use alcohol or drugs or food or whatever it is to try to nurture myself, because I've been hurt, because I have this screwed up relationship with myself, where I
Wow.
feel, that's what codependency causes us to feel like the victim of our own thoughts and our own feelings, and like our own worst enemy.
It's almost
And
like an internal bickering family. We've got the critical parent, we've got the rebel, and until we're aware of that, they just kind of play out on autopilot.
yeah, we need to get aware of it before we can change it, and we have our own internal, victim triangle going on. We got a perpetrator, a victim, and a rescuer. But the way we learned in our codependency is, the critical parent voice is the perpetrator, and then the victim is the inner child who's wounded and deprived. And then we rescue ourselves with the ways we learned to rescue ourselves growing up, were with alcohol and drugs and food and workaholism and whatever, exercise addiction, whatever. And because we didn't know how to love ourselves.
Wow, yeah. And it's interesting too, because someone could be listening to this and think, wow, like that's heavy. I don't really have the time to be looking into that right now, but at the same time, we're always spending energy. We're working on it either way. We're digging ourselves a deeper hole, or we're working on it slowly at our own pace. Like, we're doing the work either way. I think that's something that people need to recognize. So it's not like we can just put it on the back burner and it doesn't exist.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
It's because it is, it's dictating how we're living life. And we need to be conscious of it. One of the way to begin in inner child work is just become aware and start asking, why am I thinking this? Why am I acting this way? Why do I have these patterns? And just start being the detective, trying to solve the mystery, because the mystery is, who am I and what am I doing here? And it's not what we were taught.
no, exactly. Yeah, well, I think we're getting pretty close to time, but yeah, I think this is a very important conversation, and super happy that you scheduled some time.
I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to talk to you. That's great.
Where can people find your work if they're interested in purchasing some of your books?
Well, my mobile friendly website, because my original website is not mobile friendly, so many people are on mobile devices these days, is Joy to Me You 2. So it's 8 characters, 2 numbers in there. Joy, Joy, the number 2, MEU, the letter U, 2.com, joytomeyou2.com. My company is Joy to You and Me Enterprises. And when I first started the company, I went to the DMV to try to get a license plate with Joy to Me You, and they didn't have that, but they had, Joy to You and Me, but they had Joy to Me You. And that's actually healthier for me to put myself first. So that's what I end up doing with making my website is joytomeyou2.com. And so there's links to all my art. I got like over 250 pages of free content for anybody who wants to go there and check it out.
Amazing. Yeah, awesome. Well, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. I hope you do too.
Yeah, thank you very much. Bye.